Well, President Donald Trump initially wouldn't talk about his decision to end trade talks with Canada.
Do you have any questions?
Yes, sir. On the subject, sir.
No, not Canada. This is about Canada.
Why not? Why not Canada, by the way?
Why?
I mean,
because this is about a different subject right now. This is right now actually a much more important subject. We just ended a war that was going on for 30 years where 6 million people died. So don't ask me a trade question on Canada.
Okay, that didn't last. Speaking last hour from the Oval Office, Trump eventually took a question about Canada. Have a listen to this.
We have all the cards. We have every single one. We don't want to do anything bad, but they have, economically, we have such power over Canada. I'd rather not use it, but they did something with our tech companies today trying to copy Europe. You know, they copied Europe. It's not going to work out well for Europe either, and it's not going to work out well for Canada.
So as of right now, Trump says trade talks are off because of Canada's digital services tax, which takes effect this Monday. It's a tax on foreign tech companies. And this afternoon, Trump posted this, writing in part, based on this egregious tax, we are hereby terminating all discussions on trade with Canada effective immediately. We will let Canada know the tariff that they will be paying to do business with the United States of America within the next 7-day period. The U.S. has known about the digital services tax for well over a year now, so what happened? We're going to talk about all of this with our political insiders. James Moore is with us this week. He's, of course, a former Conservative cabinet minister. Because Fred is away, and here with me in the studio, Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor, and Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. James, we have a long tradition on this Friday panel of curveballs, many of them coming from the United States of America, blowing up the plan. So welcome to that. What is your reaction to what Donald Trump had to say and what the response has been from Canada so far?
I always tried to live by the motto of always respond, never react, go slow. And it looks like Prime Minister Carney and the video clip that I saw of him when he was asked about this by the media, he has that sort of dispassionate view. Who knows? On one day, he's condemning Israel for their attacks on Iran. The next day, the B-2 bombers are leaving from Missouri to do a strategic airstrike. And then the day after that, he's yelling at Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone. Who knows? What I do know is that this policy is nothing new. And in the tweet that was on, or whatever it is, the message that was on Truth Social by President Trump, he mentioned two things, right? He mentioned the digital services tax. He also mentioned supply management. It was factually not true, but these are not new issues or new grievances. The fact that it comes on a Friday afternoon is interesting. Obviously, the tax was set to come in early next week. But, you know, this is a challenge for Canada because there are constituencies in the country who support this tax. There are some people who think that this it does create a global level playing field. But there are a lot of voices in Canada, in the business community, in the creative community, who have a lot of problems with the digital services tax and what it means in terms of limiting voices on Facebook and social platforms. And it has really hurt local news in the country. So this is a spillover from C11, C18, digital services tax, and a broad policy that Prime Minister Trudeau put in place that Prime Minister Carney now has inherited. And so there may be now a reevaluation of all these things in the days going forward because, you know, the President Trump has got a pretty jaundiced view of Canada's cultural policies, broadly speaking. And this is a particular peak that President Trump has found and for which there's, frankly, a pretty large Canadian audience that agrees with him.
Right, and well, on the other side of it, Mel, though, we did see the Premier of Quebec, Francois Legault, today saying, you know, the digital services tax is important for, you know, cultural industries, but also the tariffs are a very difficult thing, hoping there can be a resolution. But I wonder, here we are 11, 12, 13 days into the 30 days, and the President says it's over. I mean, what do you make of it?
Well, I feel like there's been a few times where we've been sitting around this table where we kind of say,
who knows?
I don't really know. And you know, like we're laughing. It's not funny, but it is. You have to laugh because otherwise I really don't really have a lot of answers for how we're supposed to deal with a president who, you know, to James's point, knew about this. This is not something new. So for it to come on a Friday afternoon, it feels like more of the same of the undermining of our sovereignty, of the undermining of the relationship. And the Prime Minister has done a really good job so far in maintaining those open doors with the president, but every time we see those messages, particularly on Friday, you can't help but think, how are you supposed to have a stable relationship with the country? How are you supposed to have a stable relationship with the president who changes his mind so often or who throws these shots so often? And I think folks are getting a little bit desensitized over it, like they're not sure how to proceed or how to move forward as it relates to the digital services tax. I think a lot of people in this country think that if you do business here, you should be paying taxes here. They pay their fair share of taxes, and they expect the businesses that are here to be doing the same. So I do think that I take the point of a lot of businesses being against this, but for a lot of regular folks, I think the sentiment there is that this is something that makes sense. So I think there would be support for the Prime Minister to kind of hold steady on this. What that looks like over the next few days as we go into Monday, obviously, is interesting, but. Yeah, I feel like hard to say is always the response to these questions.
Yeah, the laugh is almost out of exasperation, right? Because there's like a personal injury law flavor to a lot of this. And Greg, I just wonder, James pointed to the clip of the Prime Minister. He left the PMO and went out very calm. This is a negotiation. We're going to keep working on, the best deal for Canada. No conversations, leaks, briefings, anything on what is actually happening behind the scenes. A very disciplined, buttoned-up kind of shop that, Jean Charest and Flavio Volpe both said it looked like it was going okay.
Yeah.
Then it wasn't. So we'll see.
Yeah, and it was funny. I thought this might come up ahead of the G7 because I heard a lot of talk about this is a retroactive payment and it goes back, I believe, to January of 22.
Yeah.
And also, the president saying that he just learned of this. Well, yeah, it got royal assent in 2024, but I believe this was a 2019 election promise, and it was mentioned in the fall economic statement of 2020. And there's no way that American officials were unaware of this. I think the election in the United States might have had something to do with how it was handled because the Biden administration kind of dropped their pursuit of this around the same time of the election. But you start with the president not knowing or saying that he's just learned of this. And I recall, I think it was at the end of January where there was a very dramatic Oval Office moment. And I was standing in the hallway waiting to come on, and someone from the then Prime Minister's office said, do reporters think that the Prime Minister may come out tonight? And I said, definitely. And they said, it's not going to happen until we get it in writing. Right. And, we were able to kind of cover that, so people got to go home on a Friday night. But that's a good policy until, other than what I don't think I've ever.
This is one of the tariff measures or whatever it was.
I don't think I've ever seen Truth Social on Truth Social. I think I see a screen capture on other platforms. So, it could exist. I'm not sure. But I think that's, the proper way to go.
Right. So on this issue of we just learned of it, as the president says, well, his Treasury Secretary was on CNBC late this afternoon to discuss collapse in trade talks. I don't know if collapse is the right word, but whatever status it is in. And Scott Bessent admitted that the Trump administration has long known about the digital services tax, but thought that since it was from the Justin Trudeau era, that Prime Minister Mark Carney would take care of it for them. Have a listen to this.
We were hoping as a sign of goodwill that the new Carney administration would at least put a break on that during the trade talks. They seem not to have. President Trump has responded, and my inclination is that Ambassador Greer over at USTR will be starting a 301 investigation into the digital services taxes to determine the amount of harm to the U.S. companies and the U.S. economy in general.
James, I wonder what you make of that there's this strange, the commentary you hear from the American officials is almost like they just say, oh, Canada should do this for us. As a sign of goodwill, put a break on this, give it to us. You're killing steel jobs. You're threatening aluminum jobs. Auto jobs are lost or on hold by the thousands. But they kind of expected as a sign of goodwill, Canada would just drop this before actually getting a concession back from the United States.
Yeah, and they threw the first punch, right? And let's not forget as well that this authority and these policies that are put in place, including the other half, as I mentioned, of the Truth Social post of the president today, All of these things are happening under the guise of a free trade deal that Donald Trump demanded the negotiation of. We negotiated in good faith, and we ratified a trade deal that Donald Trump agreed to and that he demanded the negotiation. So Canada is obeying the laws and the trade agreements and the global movement of goods and services under an agreement that Donald Trump negotiated and signed with great fanfare and celebration of his brilliance. So, so now he gets reelected from 45 to 47, then he comes in and starts attacking Canada. There's nothing, by the way, on the other side of this, there's nothing magical about the digital services tax in terms of what it means as a benefit for Canadian creators and their market audience. There's nothing that stops the government of Canada from creating other tools and other opportunities to support Canada's creative sector that would mean that you have to have in place a digital services tax. There are other ways of doing this. And then Premier Charest's suggestion in your previous segment there was an eloquent one, right, which would be to say that we're going to have a timeout or a pause in the digital services tax, and we're going to shelve the policy for, say, a calendar year while we re-examine policies that would be aligned with a renewed Canada-U.S. free trade agreement, so that our policies are aligned in a way to support the creative communities and ensure that there is parity between our countries and full access to each other's marketplaces in the rest of the world. There are things that you can do that would be beneficial. Canada and Prime Minister Carney, including from the carbon tax and a lot of policies, he has divorced himself from a lot of policies from the Trudeau era that he views as being accretive to Canada's economy and forward lean and forward benefit. There's nothing to say that the digital services tax, we couldn't take a time out on it and shelve a lot of these policies, maybe not permanently, but certainly until we get not just past the tariff fight, right, but through the CUSMA renegotiations, and then put them back on the table in terms of what is the balance of policies we want to have in Canada relative to the benefit that we would have of tariff-free market access to the U.S. economy. I think that's probably a more sweeping, thorough approach to public policy that the country needs.
But James, don't you think you'd need to get something in return for doing that at this point in time? If you were going to, knock off $3 billion of retroactive tax payments and $1 billion a year going forward, then the auto tariffs have to go away, the steel tariffs have to go away. Something has to give, because right now it's all take.
Steel, aluminum, steel, aluminum, auto. I mean, lumber. Twice as many people work in the lumber industry than work in steel and aluminum combined. The steel and aluminum are being attacked uniquely by President Trump. But you could say extend a no tariff policy, and we will not bring in this new policy and implement it until we get to the CUSMA renegotiations scheduled for calendar 26. Meanwhile, we will continue to have conversations about the broader trading relationship. Right. That would be an elegant and responsible public policy approach. But you have to have two people at the table who are interested in elegant and responsible public policy at the table.
A lot of words get thrown around in this. Elegant is rarely used. Mel, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, from the Canadian side, it seems like I think James and Mr. Charest, they have way more experience with this stuff than I do. But there are ways to use the pause button to get you to a solution. But you do need a sweetener here, right?
Totally. You need to be able to meet in the middle and find a path forward. Folks here are hurting, particularly in the steel and aluminum industries, and that hurt is not going away anytime soon. So to your point, to take something off the table without anything in return, and when outbursts like this happen on the regular, it's hard. It's a hard sell. The other thing that I just can't help but talk about, the imagery of this week. I don't know what social platforms you live on. I live on Instagram, and I've just been bombarded by the Bezos wedding in Italy this week and how it's going to cost up to $56 billion. And I don't know who in my universe is like, yeah, that man should not be paying taxes in Canada. So, and I would say New Democrats, Liberals, and Conservatives that I'm friends with would agree that maybe he's got too much money. But that imagery of that as this conversation is happening, and again, there are no concessions. There are no, okay, we're going to play nice here. It's, we expect you to drop everything. We expect you to do everything that we want you to do. And again, to James' point, we threw the first punch. They
threw the first punch. Yeah.
Yes.
They
threw the first punch. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a hard sell to people right now, and it's hard to see how you take that off the table without being given something. But again, you're not really dealing with somebody who's reasonable.
Yeah, and Greg, there is a innocent bystander component to this, for the Canadian economy in some ways. You're standing around minding your own business, broadly playing by the rules. And, the battering of your certainty, of your wallet, of your savings, of your employment, it just keeps coming and coming and coming and coming. I just don't see how you can give any kind of a broad concession to the president right now, like while the 30-day window and the July 21st counter-tariff deadline are still there. Yeah, and the Secretary's comments, it does beg the question, well, did you have this conversation with the new Prime Minister? Why are you doing it via American television? Full disclosure, I did work for a streaming service for a long time, and I don't want to conflate some of the issues, but James has mentioned, the creative industries in Canada, and I understand because they spend a lot of money in Canada, and there are a lot of spin-offs from that. But also, I understand, if a ride-sharing app is making money and they're making money off Canadians, and we're looking at other jurisdictions that have a DST and they're doing that, of course, it lines up that we're going to do this. But, just to kind of mess it up even a bit further, this is not to say that some U.S. states would not also introduce a DST. New York State at one point was, I don't know currently, but at one point they were talking about a 4% DST. So I feel like the president has kind of, surprise, come to this lately, and I think we need to kind of wait until we actually, as I said in the previously, let's see what actually what they're going to be negotiating with or on. If there's a pause, I don't think people will be. It's been backdated for quite a while. I don't think another pause is going to be horrendous. Yeah, but, these digital giants, they have more power than some countries and some nation states and pay very little tax, even in the countries where they are, because of the way the U.S. tax system is structured. Like, Bezos can do these weddings because he can get around paying a lot of things by just not realizing the wealth. But, whatever the implications of what the president said today, it creates uncertainty. And this is a big issue for a lot of the provinces. The Alberta Finance Minister, Nate Horner, was out today, and he was asked today about President Trump's abrupt end to the trade talks with Canada, and his point was that this just fuels the uncertainty that's already rippling through the economy. Have a listen to this.
We're sitting here talking about investment uncertainty and this chilling effect on the economy overall, and this is a great example. I think even this morning before that post was made, people were feeling pretty good about the progress on the trade file between Canada and the U.S. So it just highlights this uncertainty is something that until it truly goes away, investors are not going to invest. We're not going to create more jobs and be all that we can be with this hanging over our heads. So I don't really have a specific response. I hope they can do their deals in good faith, behind the curtain, and hopefully it happens sooner than later.
David, perhaps we could set up a meeting between him and his boss in terms of addressing uncertainty.
Right. Well, yeah, but there's a bigger point there, right, that he's talking about, and James, just that everyone was feeling pretty good that it was moving, including the negotiators for Canada, right? And then boom. And like Catherine Cobden was here yesterday from the Canadian Steel Association, and it's like worried that like in the next 10 days or so, thousands and thousands of more jobs could go down. This, your order books are not going to get any better with this coming from the White House today, James.
Yeah, obviously not helpful. Minister Horner's not wrong. One hopes that things can get back on track, but that's frankly part of the issue of the Trump administration. This president promised 90 trade deals in 90 days. We're now on day 78. There are 0 trade deals. I think that's among the reasons why he's probably doing this, right? So when the 90-day clock runs out and there are 0 trade deals, he can say to Congress or to the people or to the media who chastise him, he can say, look, among the reasons why we don't have a trade deal is because Canada went forward with this DST. We thought we had a new deal. They got a new government. They got rid of that Trudeau guy. They brought in Carney, and he seemed like a good guy. Then, bang! Right before, right before July 4th, right before our national holiday, and they're celebrating their candidate, they bring in a tax and punish our digital producers. Like, this is not what you do. So you can sort of see himself, casting himself ahead a couple of weeks to give himself some talking points when he doesn't get his 90 deals in 90 days. That's one thing. Second, Minister Horner's right. The uncertainty is not helpful. The province of Alberta may wish to not contribute to the uncertainty uncertainty by maybe reversing course on their plebiscite referendum policies of, allowing people the gasoline and matches to put, Canada's certainty on destabilized grounds in the months going forward. That would be a phenomenal contribution to the stability of Canada and our economy. And the third thing is what you said there. I think is correct, David. Right, that this is not a political game. There are thousands of people whose jobs are on the line who do see these headlines, and when they get a little chirp on their phone for a news update and they see a headline that trade talks are off, they get really scared about their mortgage, their kids, their family, and their future. And this is very serious stuff. And I know that the Prime Minister understands that, the administration understands that, and hopefully, as I said, in my earlier recommendation on a way forward, that they'll find the right approach to maybe take a timeout on this tax, reconsider it, punt it down the road, and then re-engage and maybe get some kind of a concession from the Americans and get things back on a positive track.
Yeah, Greg, I think that's kind of might have been where you were going, right? Like that the uncertainty in Alberta is also, the particular political coalition that is the United Conservative Party base, creates challenges for any premier, and they're manifesting here right now. But, the uncertainty from Trump right now, like, if you're Sault Ste. Marie and Algoma Steel, like that's the town, right? Like there are certain towns like steel towns and things that remind me of the fish plant towns, man. But like when the fishery collapsed in the mid-90s back home, that there was no future for it afterwards, right? And these are the sort of stakes as the president does these things on a whim.
Yeah, and we certainly talked about that from about January on. Anytime that any of us got outside of the Ottawa bubble, I was always struck by the number of people that were referencing the uncertainty, and you started to feel it in things like your retirement savings, right? They've kind of had a comeback, but it's this continuous uncertainty. And look, from Canada's point of view, the Prime Minister had a pretty good couple of weeks. The G7, the NATO meetings, the deal with the European Union, and all of a sudden, late on a Friday, we have this huge fly in the ointment, and we don't actually know what exactly the United States government is going to pursue. And look, I'm very happy to see the Alberta Finance Minister say this. I think you will probably see some other premiers follow on this. And look, just anecdotally, I can look literally in my backyard and see a whole bunch of Canadian flags up today and last night that in places that I wouldn't have seen last year. So I think Canadians are still very, very much behind, our premiers and our Prime Minister on this. I don't think the United States, this is, July 4th is always a big day in this town. Yep. I think it's going to be an interesting week next week.
Yeah. I'm very curious to see July 1 and July 4, how those things go here in Ottawa. Inside the bubble protector from a lot of the problems that the rest of the country is dealing with. But, Mel, you sort of look at this shock from Trump. I don't know if it's a shock. I don't know what a Trump shock is anymore. But you can kind of see the knitting together of all the different avenues that the Prime Minister has been sort of pursuing, right? The idea of, internal free trade, defense industrial policy, knitting it together, the deals with Europe on building trade and defense partnerships, the commitment with NATO, because of the unreliability of the United States. But, all of that is going to cost, along with this uncertainty. And we did hear from the Prime Minister today in committee to the 5%, or not today, this week, the 5% NATO target, that this is going to eat up a bigger and bigger and bigger share of federal spending power. And we're going to have some difficult conversations over the next 10 years, which is kind of the sacrifice, I think, that he had been alluding to, that the federal government may have to stop doing some things. Because I don't want that to get lost in what Trump did, because that was a significant statement from Mark Carney, I thought. Yeah,
and he kind of said that we're going to have to, take a look at where our spending goes, which I will point out that Jagmeet Singh mentioned during the campaign a few times that this is something that could be on the table. And listen, a lot of the things that Prime Minister has done in either investing or spending more time developing other relationships, in investing, in removing, the trade barriers that we have in this country, I think those are all good things. I think one really big hole as part of his strategy has been how we take care of people in a more concrete way. And I think the big thing that I'm seeing, at least in the last few weeks, is a lot of his announcements are focused on investing in our industries, making sure businesses have other avenues if they need to close doors. But where has been missing is the help for workers who are being laid off and who will be continued to laid off. I know there were some initial measures for EI, but nothing has been done to actually address a lot of the problems with EI for those folks who are going to be losing their jobs. There are no, replacement wages or anything like that. And when you're talking about those difficult decisions of where we're investing and where we're not, I think that is scary for a lot of those workers. I think if what we see with the lack of stability with the U.S., if that continues, we're just going to see more. Unfortunately, I hope that doesn't happen, but I think we're going to see more of that. And as we alluded earlier, people are having to pay their mortgages or having to put food on the table. And that fear and that anxiety is just going to elevate if we don't address that. So as he's having, those reflections of where we invest and where we not, I think it's massively important that we don't forget how we're helping people make ends meet, because if not, we're going to go back to the same anger of, the flags that we were seeing everywhere, and that would be a massive step back from where we've gotten in the, everybody's flying that Canadian flag, which I love seeing, but we haven't seen for a long time around here.
Yeah, I mean, the timelines in these things, like, the steel industry has talked about the need for maybe a COVID-style wage subsidy, not necessarily a COVID scale, but COVID style. If they get into a prolonged shutdowns because of all of this. And the horizons for the difficult choices, though, James, as the Prime Minister laid it out, gets up to around 2028, 2029, 2030, those sorts of things. But I wonder what you thought when we heard him say that if we get up to $150 billion in 2025 dollars in defense spending, that's like $1 in $3 of federal spending going to the defense industry every year. The kind of conversations and things you have to say no to or just dump overboard to get to those targets. I mean, what was your thoughts when the Prime Minister laid that out?
Yeah, and hopefully there'll be some thoughtful analysis over the summer from some third parties, not just, frankly, political parties and vested interests, right? Of people who sort of dispassionately put on the table of, well, what are the big pieces of spending that we're doing in the government of Canada and what might fall off the table. You look at the child care agreements with the provinces that are going to time lapse. The Prime Minister has said that he'll renew them, but at what scale, at what pace, and what growth rate, given that Canadian immigration levels have really gone down quite dramatically. We saw some new numbers just the other day about how Canadian immigration is flatlined and is receding. So what do the transfers to provinces look like in the next 5 to 10 years, and how might we re-rationalize those costs? What do other agreements that we have with the provinces, a lot of big infrastructure spend, but there's other spending on infrastructure that is sort of steady state and flowing to provinces. Might that be reimagined? There's also a closer way to get to 3.5% that you've talked about on your show. Incorporating Coast Guard into our spend, which we've done, increasing salaries, which we've done, having some industrial regional benefits or the downstream effects of the industrial benefits of spending, have that included into the sort of the percent of GDP that constitutes the spend on defense. So there are a lot of ways of sort of capturing a growth in spend that makes sense. But to the original point, though, of this whole segment and talking about Donald Trump, just remind everybody, we are 1/8 of the way through Donald Trump 47.
Yeah, I know.
There's a long tail to the consequences of the November election last year. And so all these twists and curves and all these different things that are going to happen, it's going to be dramatic. And then once you get past the midterms of next year, if President Trump, if the Republicans lose the House but hold the Senate, which is kind of the contemporary projection of things, then that actually might make the president even more aggressive and more assertive with the constitutional powers that he has by the power of the presidency, to be even more aggressive on trade matters, because it's one of the things that he does have the power to exercise as he goes into his sunset years as the president of the United States. And then there'll be the jockeying for the Republican Democratic nominations. So the Canada-U.S. relationship is complicated. It's deep. It goes way past the digital services tax and the contemporary tariffs. This is a long, complicated relationship that's on fire right now, it feels like. But the cooler heads, longer view, rational approach is the mindset that we should start getting ourselves to, playing the very, very long game.
Yeah, the time frame you spell out, I was doing this very early in the Trump mandate, and I had to stop because it was freaking me out. But a presidential term is 1,461 days. We're 159 days into this one. So, there's a lot of math, but it's like 1,302 days to go. Greg, quick last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, and I was, before even James got to the midterms, I was thinking about it as well. And you look at the Democratic Party, you actually can't count on them right now. The other thing I thought this might be today was, the president had a terrible week trying to defend what they did in Iran. I thought this might be a squirrel distraction, and he didn't even want to address the question at the beginning. So obviously somebody's got his ear on this, and he's done that, and that actually I find a bit concerning, because a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and look, we know the avenues of conversation are open between him and the Prime Minister. That was certainly my conversations with Flavio Volpe and Jean Charest today that imply that those continue. Like, we don't get readouts on those. I guess, it's not a formal meeting, so you wouldn't, but I think they're going to need to talk over the weekend, to try to get something done here. All right, they're not out of time. We're out of time. James, it's great to have you here on the Friday, man. We appreciate you filling in. James Moore, Greg McEachern, and Melanie Richer.